What if? What if? What if? So often that expression comes as a sigh of regret for things you wanted to do but didn't, or of remorse for things that you did do but didn't turn out well. This is a story of a what if that was sad and serious, but actually was also an opportunity that was taken up, and thankfully so. You need to know that both my parents had lost their parents when they were children, and although my parents had siblings, we weren't a very close family as regards aunts, uncles and cousins. Often it is the grandparents that keep a family close, and if they are not there, the bonds are loose. My father talked of his father, who died in France in 1916 during the First World War. My father was 5 at the time, so could not really have known his dad, but in his own way was proud of him, I think. We did not know much about Grandfather Sidney, but when I retired, I decided to do some family tree investigations. Both my parents were dead by this stage, so I knew that whatever I found out, it would not upset them. Through various ancestry websites and forums, I tracked down a second cousin, and then I went to Middlesex to meet her, where I was born and where she still lived. Although we had never met before, we talked as if we had known each other forever, and we were not strangers, but recognised each other as family. Thankfully, she too had been interested in the family's history, so had kept all the papers from her own grandfather, my uncle. One was a moving picture my grandfather had drawn in the trenches, showing just some of the horrors. It was graphic, but very well drawn. She gave me a copy of that picture, which I framed, and it has pride of place on my wall, in spite of the unhappy subject matter. Another paper she had was a letter my grandfather had written home to his wife in December 1915, saying how much he was looking forward to his leave in the new year, when he could see her and the children again. Alongside that was a letter written by his commanding officer to my grandmother, telling of his death in January 1916. And of course, he never got home. What if I hadn't started on the road to find out more about my family? I would never have found out all this information. I discovered that Grandad was buried in a small communal cemetery in a small town called Mazingarbe. As far as I was aware, no one from the family had ever been out to France to visit his grave. He died in 1916, and in 2016 I started to think that I should go out to France and find him. I put it off, but in 2018, 100 years after the end of the war, I decided there should be no more what-ifs, and I would go. My own husband had died, and my 2 adult children were very busy with work and their own lives, so I decided I would go on my own. Sadly, also the cousin who had been so helpful had also died after a long illness. Actually, in the end, I was quite glad to make this trip on my own. This was my trip to find my grandfather, and I did not want to regard it as a holiday. I was nervous about doing this completely on my own, but also felt it was nothing compared to all those young men who had gone off to their unknown fate. Although not at all fluent, I can speak some French, and what a good thing that turned out to be. The journey on Eurostar to Lille, and then on French trains to Béthune, went smoothly, and the hotel in Béthune was just across from the station. So far, so good. The problem then was to get from Béthune to Mazingarbe. It wasn't far, and I decided a taxi would be the best option. Unfortunately, my French lost something in the translation, and the taxi driver took me to the wrong cemetery in the wrong village. I searched the rows of war graves several times, but could not find the right one. This was probably the lowest moment of the trip. To have come all this way and not to find what I had come for. What if I had given up then, so near but so far? I waited until the manager of the cemetery returned and slowly explained my problem. What if I hadn't been able to speak any French? This was a small town in the middle of France. Why should I have expected anyone to speak English? I had taken the relevant paperwork with me, and this lovely man diligently searched through his records until he suddenly said that this was the wrong cemetery in the wrong town. The right cemetery was in the next town, near but too far to walk to. I asked if he could organise a taxi. What did he do but indicate that he would take me himself, which he did. What if I hadn't persisted and waited for someone I could ask? What if I hadn't managed to explain my problems to the manager in my halting French? And what if I hadn't put my trust in him to take me to the right place? As it was, I did all of those things and finally found my grandfather's grave and was able to lay down my poppy I had taken from England and the flowers I had bought in France. After the initial disappointment of being in the wrong place, I could almost not believe it when I was standing in front of Grandfather's headstone, reading his name that I had so often researched and embedded in my mind. It was not a sad moment as I had expected, but one of thankfulness that I had achieved at last what I had thought about for so long. The war graves in this local communal cemetery were in one corner, so it was not rows and rows of crosses that you see in Normandy, but looked more as if the town had taken these men to their hearts and given them the respect they deserved. The graves were well kept and clean. The graves that did make me cry, however, were the ones of young men of 17 and 18, and the ones that were marked, known only to God. I had found my grandfather. The families of those men would never know where they were. My grandfather was young, in his late 20s, but he had had the chance of having a wife and children, and 2 generations on, someone had found him. So now all I would add is, don't take unwise risks naturally, but if there is something you feel driven to do and you are at all able to do it, do it. Don't look back and ask, what if? And even if there are difficulties, be glad that you have done it.